Christy, I am so excited to be here with you in your offices at BIP Capital. This place is gorgeous. And really, for those who don't know, before I introduce Christy, I better share BIP Capital is one of the leading venture capital and private equity firms in the entire South. One of the most active and one of the ones with, this is just me talking, longest visions. So BIP invests in a way that most venture capital firms never will. When they invest in a company, if that company hits its metrics and they believe in it, they keep investing in that company, even out of the same fund. And most VC firms, they don't do that. If they invest in you out of the seed fund when you're not seed, they don't invest in you anymore. You might qualify for their growth fund, but at BIP, they've really engineered the performance of what it takes to be a great setting the stage, setting the bar startup in your industry. When they enter, they plan to help fuel that growth. And to do that, they focus on performance engineering. And the person who runs that and builds that is sitting right next to me right here. So, Christy, is that how you would frame?
Well, I was going to say, what a beautiful introduction. Yes, that's perfect. And I do think that the way that we invest and the tranche investing and the uniqueness of our investor base being, high net worth individuals, so that we have that flexibility is certainly what lends itself to the way what we think about building the business as a partner with our entrepreneurs.
It's absolutely visionary. One of the things I love about it is how people who have often made their own wealth, or their family made their own wealth a generation or two ago, if not in this generation, are investing in the next generation within the same environment and culture at BIP. And so, moving back a little bit from the firm, though, I want to really focus in this conversation on Christy. Her story, which I don't know all the details of, is, I am sure, pretty revelatory. So we'll start with maybe the beginning, where you grew up and how you first learned that you were interested in all things IT and growth. And please share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I have I would say, like, a rather unusual path. I don't think anybody would have looked at me, 20 years ago and thought that that was the path, including myself, that I was going to take. So, went to graduate school for international. So I got an IMBA, and grew up in Colorado. That's where I went to school. And my first job was a joint venture between the IMF and the World Bank. They were doing
Wow.
micro.
Well, you got into finance right away.
Well, that's true. Although when I say microloan, it's like $500 US. So it was going to mostly
Kiva.
well, everything's relative. So, but that was my very first experience working with very small companies. And so when I say companies, that's probably overly generous, but, mostly entrepreneurs, small women artisans who were, had something that was, certainly valuable, and it would be, something that they could build a business around, but they just didn't know quite how to bring it to market. So when I say it was very rudimentary, like even teaching them, like, okay, here's how we catch the bus and we go down to San Jose and we're going to walk into these stores, and here's how we're going to negotiate pricing, and here's how you keep your books. But, the whole idea was just that they were empowered and they were in a position where they could pay that loan back. But one thing that was like super informative for me was just how small incremental changes can make a massive impact on someone's success, and how you can leverage just very simple, basic understanding of things to help someone who doesn't necessarily have that knowledge, and to put them on a different trajectory. So when I came back, I was there for 2 years. It was absolutely the best experience that anyone could have. And
so you're in Costa Rica for
yes,
2
I was
years.
in Costa
In
Rica.
San Jose?
No, I was in rural Costa Rica. It was a little town called Bijagua. So it was about an hour and a half bus ride, which we did often.
So I
down
take it
to
you
San
speak
Jose.
Spanish.
Well, I would say that I did. And
Do you still love pollo frito?
I do. Well, and you know what is really funny is when I came back, I had actually, that was my last year of graduate school. So you have to come back, and it was the University of Denver, and there was 3 different schools. So you had the School of Law, the School of Business, and international. And so part of the requirement for graduation is that you're fluent in another language. So came back to take the test, and we were obviously speaking Spanish. And so the professor stopped after 5 minutes and he said, you know what? You pass. And he said, but I have to tell you, I have absolutely no idea where you got that accent.
So clearly, you're very fluent in Spanish, and you picked up that accent in rural Costa Rica.
That's right. Well, and he said something like, it would be like someone learning English in like the deep South. And he's like, actually, I think it would be more like deep Virginia. So I'm not entirely sure. I haven't had any problems, since then with people not understanding it. But we actually have both of our children, which I think because of my early experience going abroad, that it was just so like foundationally important on so many levels that both of our kids actually attend college abroad. So our daughter's in Hungary and our son is in Spain. So he's in Barcelona. So I'm always kidding him when he's like talking and I'm like, let's hear how good that Spanish is. And his pronunciation is much better than his mother's, but we'll see.
Maybe more Castilian, but
That's
not
it.
necessarily
true.
better.
That is
You
true.
know, it just depends on what you're doing.
And if he was in Bihagwa, they might not understand him, but they would understand me. So anyway.
I love how you said that. So one of the things we have in common actually is that pull towards international finance at a very young age. So my other country was Russia. And
Oh, how about that?
I know it was very different. And so I got to spend a few months in Russia, and I really appreciated that as I was growing up. But also on finance, I I want to know if you feel that's the things that work at the small scale tend to work at the larger scale. What, if anything, do you feel like you've pulled forward from some of those very first impressions when you were very young and very fresh and new in the world?
So I think the answer is yes. Because I think that there's like when I think about like, so what do we do today? And so like what is the approach and what is the methodology? You're going to meet every company where they're at because they're all at different stages. They all have different, assortment of talent that they're bringing to the table and completely different backgrounds and things that they have strengths in that they've leaned into. But it kind of comes down to sort of the basic things. The first is getting visibility to what they're doing. So putting in software and setting KPIs and measuring things. That's not necessarily the first thing on an entrepreneur's mind when they're getting started because they're all about like getting revenue and then we'll figure out the rest of it. But what they don't understand is that they're super handicapped if they're not using data to really understand what's happening underneath, even if they're super early. So one thing that we prioritize is bringing that visibility forward and prioritizing that super early on. It also gets us on the same sheet of music. I'm sure that you've been in situations where, they're talking about, hey, we had X amount this month. And, then you find out that that's kind of a mix of renewals and new, and it gets convoluted and you're not, talking the same language. And so you're seeing the business very differently as an investor and the entrepreneur. So it's really important to get aligned on what's important and what are the milestones and get all that agreement up front. So I think regardless of what size company you are, like getting visibility to what's happening, super important. The next is foundation. And so oftentimes people say, well, we're having a problem with the top of the funnel. And so I think we just need to think through our sales processes. And what you recognize already is that, okay, it could be that, but more likely it's an issue that you're not targeting the right, ICP, or
You haven't defined an ICP yet at all.
Exactly.
I just blogged about it, but it's like an ICP is not the last 50 customers and a definition that includes all of them.
Well, or it's not the last 3 customers, which is typically what ends up happening. And, if you think about it, it makes total sense because when they come to us, they've been kind of bumping around trying to find product market fit. And that actually means like selling to pretty much anyone who's willing to pay you. And so you're not especially focused. You're not especially disciplined on how you're doing that. You're just finding opportunities and then exploring saying, well, if that person is willing to pay us, maybe other people who look like that person are willing to pay us. that doesn't mean that that's the best
It doesn't
segment to
mean they'll
go
pay you
after.
the most or the fastest.
Exactly.
Which is the
Or
idea.
that your product brings the most value for.
Right.
Like it could
Yeah.
just be like tertiary, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
just happen to luck into finding people who that's important to, but not as
100%.
important as others. So it really is sort of like this foundational thing that we do every single time, is because also your segmentation, your ICP, your value prop, all of those things are, if every single company that comes on board, like, do you have these? Yes, 100%. And what you said was very apropos, that what oftentimes is they've watered down the value prop to fit everybody.
Yeah.
And it's not really a value prop if you're not speaking to the specific needs and the pains of the people that you're trying to sell to. So double clicking on those things, it's great if you've done work on it. That's probably a really good start. But then trying to validate that with the data, and then that's another reason that you have to start with getting visibility, because so often you'll say, because like tertiary, it's like, who is paying us? Who is growing and who are we churning? Like, and then let's do some segmentation against that and see if we can see a pattern. Well, if you don't capture those things and you don't know and you can't understand what's happening, you're blind. And so
I can tell I'm right in the heart of your day to day. So I want to do a little bit more looking back. I know you've been at BIP for many years, and so this has become the heart and soul of your work. Were there any other experiences between Costa Rica, working with World Bank and IMF, and I really wanted to ask about your tenure at Achieve It as CEO. And please share a little bit more about what you learned there and what Achieve It did.
oh my goodness. Okay, so Achieve It is execution software, so it helps companies.
What a surprise.
No. Yes, that is true. There's no lack of commentary and the people that I know, that's ironically where I ended up. But it helps companies, execute against their biggest initiatives. And so I was very fortunate that by far that experience informs and helps calibrate and all of the things that are important today. I think that the main reason that I can be successful in this position is because I was in those shoes. And there's nothing, and ironically, I was on this side, then went on that side, then came back to this side. So I've been blessed with a really like generous set of experiences that help form like how I approach business building today. But I can tell you that when I first came, well, first of all, it's such a humbling experience because I was on this side. It's very easy to tell other people what they need to do. It's, oh, you need to do this, you need to do
Art, I even have an opinion.
that.
And yeah,
Yeah. Oh, and
founders hate VCs with a lot of opinions and very little execution skill.
and also an uninformed opinion oftentimes,
Yeah.
like where you're tone deaf and you're saying things. I mean, I've certainly I'm not
I'm
saying
sure I've done
anything
it
that
too.
I was just gonna
I'm
say,
sure I've done it too.
when I got to the other side, I was like literally thinking to myself, man, I hope I didn't do that, but I think I probably did.
Right.
And so it is completely different to have to execute against things. And it's not like you have a singular thing that has to be solved and you can do that and then focus on the next thing. You have 1,000 spinning plates and they all have to be solved in order for you to go ahead and get traction. And so,
One of the things I think about is like VCs like to talk about risk, and there's the unquantifiable risk. And we talk about that, and it's sort of an area on our spreadsheet. It's an unquantifiable risk area, and we have a number on it. But the entrepreneur is swimming in unquantifiable risk. And for them, it is a day-to-day living experience. It is not on a spreadsheet. And I think that's why so much VC unconstructive feedback and criticism lands poorly, because we can easily forget that that very large area that we feel that we've accounted for, called, that risk, is actually their day to day.
yeah,
And there's opportunity in that risk too. And also that's the entrepreneur's responsibility. And it's not necessarily our responsibility. We're working on a portfolio.
right.
And so it's so interesting to me, that dynamic. But anyway, I don't want to lead us too
No, and
far off base.
no,
but-
it's actually a very great observation. The other thing that is really evident, at least when I got here, was that, I have my framework of like how much has to get solved in order for all of these things that they're saying is going to happen. And then I've also been on the other side where what were my forecasts when I was trying to
Right.
get funding? Am I realistic? Does anybody on my team really believe that we're going to be able to hit that? Well, if every single thing and every factor that we've modeled goes right, yes, we can hit it. Do we feel totally confident? No, but the expectation is that we're not going to come in here and give you some super conservative forecast. So now on the other side, I recognize that. And I also recognize that we're most of the problem because we accept like things that are unreasonable to expect that we know that they're not going to be
Right.
able to execute. And then what's
That's
the
not
first
fair either.
thing that we do? Start putting pressure on them to execute. So do they think that they have to, or that they even have the luxury of putting in the foundational building blocks and that they have the luxury to slow down in order to speed up? No, of course not. And what are they saying? Well, we're going to take some of this and then we're going to invest in sales and marketing because that's all we need. We got the system. We understand who we're going after. We
The
understand
magical hire that's
Exact-
going to fix everything.
and-
Okay, but let me back
Yeah.
up. How did you get into VC?
Okay, so I came back from Costa Rica and I actually got I was looking for a job international, and so I ended up working for a company called it was a manufacturer in steel. It's called Florida Wire and Cable. So I was
That
running.
business is really interesting.
Well, and you're like, and I still don't see where the connection came. So, but I was doing import export, and
They liked your talent.
and I was
Spanish was
also
probably an asset on the job.
it was, and the fact that it was actually in like an odd way an advantage to be a female because it was such a rarity. It's so odd to see anyone in that field. So
Everyone in the room looked at you. You got it.
They
You
were
got a
like-
shot.
I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Yeah, and so funny enough that I was married someone that was also selling in that industry, and he would get so frustrated. He's like, I've been trying to get into that account for 10 years.
And you're like,
I-
what? This
Yeah,
one?
exactly. I don't know how to explain it to you. Wink, wink. But yeah. So it actually, I'm sure you as most things you have to like be overly knowledgeable and you have to demonstrate acumen probably beyond
Opening the
And-
door
and so
because
that-
you're different is cool, but you still have to close the deal. And that
100%.
takes a completely different skill set.
And maybe even a stronger skill set than would be expected of someone else. But be that as it may, I was doing that and
Florida Wire and Steel. Great.
yeah. So I moved from that, and there's actually there's a process called plastic injection molding, and so they make chairs that hold the steel. And so ended up with a opportunity to go to another manufacturer, and so that took us to Sugarland, Texas, and so we were there for a while. And this whole time we were getting ready to start our family, and so I was trying to think of how I could sort of balance those two things, and so decided that what I would do is like open a gym for kids. And so I'd put together a business plan, and we had a mutual friend who knew Mark, and he's like, hey, I have this friend, Mark Buffington, and he's works with companies all the time. And
He invests in crazy things.
well, and it wasn't even for investment. It actually was because I was being asked to this is the first time that I'd ever tried to negotiate like a lease.
Yeah.
And I was like, they were asking for all these, personal guarantees and all of these other things. It was getting a little beyond my risk threshold. And so our friend said, hey, why don't you call Mark and just see what he thinks and, run your business plan past him and all that. So
I have to pause right here and just say many VCs, many younger VCs that I know, especially in my Kaufman Fellows Network, they are constantly asking how to be more referable to entrepreneurs. And there are some VCs, and I'm very fortunate to be one of them, and I hope I never lose that touch. But entrepreneurs do seek me out, but it's for the odd question, just like what you're talking about. And it's very hard to explain to younger VCs who are building their chops that there is indeed a component of knowledge, just pure execution, operational knowledge that will attract entrepreneurs to you. And the more you share your expertise, things you really know, even if it's gritty, even if it's not sexy, the more entrepreneurs get referred to you for that bit of expertise. And so that's just such a beautiful example, because an office lease isn't something that people are, oh, wow, we're a worldwide expert. But that you were referred to Mark for something like that, which is, of course, not his zone
Oh,
of
for sure not.
genius.
Right.
But yes, he does understand and he can share. And so that is something I hope every young VC and aspirational VC listening to us really hears and takes in. And maybe their zone of expertise is building muscle. I mean, whatever it
Right,
is.
right.
But you can entrepreneurs love people who know how to get something done. And so you got Mark's perspective on your lease.
Well, and ironically, then he was in the like beginning stages of sort of starting the well side with Bill. And so I don't know that maybe like a month, 6 weeks later, he and our mutual friend were playing golf and he said, "Hey, whatever happened to your friend Christy? Did she decide to, sign the lease or whatever?" And he said, "No, I think it's beyond her risk threshold." So Mark said, "Hey, I'm doing something in Atlanta. Do you think that, I'm like thinking about calling her? Do you think that she would be open?" And he's like, "I have no idea." So Mark called, said, "Hey, I don't want to throw you off your dream or anything, but I'm actually doing something. I was just wondering if you would be interested in doing something." So he's talking and he's explaining, he's got this vision and that he's going to like disrupt, the way that the ability for everyone else to have the same access to the way that high net worth portfolios are run, and that the people that can least afford all the fees are the people that are getting them. And so
Yeah.
he goes on for like 10, 15 minutes and he's super passionate about it. And so then I said, are you sure you have the right person? Because I have absolutely no experience in any of this. Like you could like there's a lot of things I've done, but this is not one of them. And he said, "Actually, that's exactly what he says, I'm a good, I'd like to think I'm a good read on people." And he's like, "I don't want anybody who has any bias of that this is the way that's going to be done,
The
because
people in the industry.
I'm gonna disrupt it. And like I just need, there's just, in our conversation, there's just something that it was interesting. And, I think I'd like to just explore conversation." So anyway, long story short on that, ended up our youngest was starting kindergarten. So we were like, if we're gonna make a move, now's the time to try it. So we leased our house in Texas, leased a house here, and gave it a shot. And I gotta admit that the first 6 months, I was going home, and you know how you leave something that you feel exceptionally like you're the person that everybody comes to, and
Right.
you know it backwards and forwards, and you feel very competent.
You'd been in steel and aluminum a long time.
Yeah. And so then I came and I went home and told my husband, I have to tell you, I have no idea what was said today." I was like in a conference room, they're using all these acronyms, and I would just write everything down and then I would Google it. And thank goodness for Google, because that really helped.
Right there with you. When I got into financial management, even though I have an MBA in stat and I know a lot of the math, the industry, um, going for the Series 65. Exactly, right? There's just so many. The laws are all abbreviated. The types of people are all it's like the military. There's an acronym for everything.
100%.
Yeah.
And you're sitting with people who've done this their entire career. So that's just rolling off their tongues. And this is, they all understand. And it was very uncomfortable for like probably 6 months, until you can get your knowledge, certainly not on par, but enough that you could follow what's happening. Yeah. And so, but I've always had an operational bent, and that's what I was there for, is to help put the infrastructure in. And I was actually quite fortunate, because at that time the SEC was requiring, well, they, basically a plain language policy manual. And
You're like, perfect.
I was like, Google is my friend. So,
and I'll be the judge of whether or not that's plain language.
And Google and well, yes, and that was very easy for me to litmus. And the other thing is that all that really that exercise was putting in, like, this is the outcome of what you have to make sure that you're protecting against. What are your processes and procedures to ensure that you're in compliance with that? So they didn't prescribe the way that you did things; they prescribed the outcome. Well, that was very easy for me to like, okay, well, I'll reverse engineer and we'll just put in all these policies. So in essence, you're like building all the infrastructure for the company. So now all of a sudden, things that you didn't know anything. Now you're the person that knows all the policies and procedures. And so it very quickly it became a dynamic where, I was really comfortable because that was something that I can do in my sleep. So we did that. And at that time, there was no fund. And we were, Mark was just passing the hat around and, doing single purpose vehicles, and did that a couple times. He had early success, and decided that he was going to launch a fund, and then ask if I could go do the same thing on that side.
Awesome. And so that's how you found yourself sitting in the CEO chair.
Well, yes, because we had, as you know, when you have, just a few people at the fund, then everyone's working with the portfolio companies. And it was one of those things. And I actually really enjoyed it because it was, hey, can you go work with them on a pricing model? And can you go help them build their tech stack? And quite honestly, a lot of those things I didn't necessarily know really well, but, I love nothing more than a good whiteboard session. And so that's also where you really understand so much. 90% of the solution is in their heads. Your job is only to just help them build a framework and a construct to help them think through it and help get it out in a form that is actionable for them. And so that's very different than having to know everything about a lot, like, or a little bit a lot about a lot of
You
things.
know, one of the things that so we are not a thesis investor, we're a generalist seed B2B investor, but we do have some theses and thoughts that we're following and things we believe, things that we're very convicted about. One of the things we're very convicted about at Valor is that that type of design engineering is the key skill that is going to differentiate, we believe, the big winners from the mediocre and the shutdowns. Because in this age of AI that we're all living in, no one is going to have all of the execution bias that AI will increasingly become responsible for. But if you don't frame it properly, with that kind of thinking, someone who legitimately has a whiteboard session mentality and a dependencies mentality, we're going to be really focused on those types of thinkers as we make new investments in Fund 3 and that type of approach to solving problems. Because to some extent, I feel like AI is so accelerating execution that if you don't think through it well, you can succeed much faster. You can also fail much faster. And we're seeing
Because you're executing against the wrong strategy.
exactly, we're seeing everything shrinking in terms of time to know, is it going to work or not? And so then the core resource or the constrained resource becomes the ability of the humans in the room.
To take the information, pivot, or adjust to the new data.
And design a process that accelerates not just information gathering like in the search world, but knowledge
Of how to apply
creation.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really such an interesting new world.
Well, and I mean, and just if you just think exponentially, where we'll be.
I guess there's a-
Cameo. This is Andrew Somoza. He works at, BIP Capital too. Okay. Thanks for stopping by.
That's right. We might have been a little short-sighted on our location.
I want people to have the real experience.
go.
This
That's
is also
exactly
the
it.
real black coffee from that machine.
And
Yeah,
there's really people working here.
it's
We'll be
super
back and
cool.
forth.
Yeah. So no, I think people like authentic. You know what? So let's
Yeah, that's right.
it's always
It's kind of
good
like
to
in
see
Zoom
Andrew.
where it's always and Mark. So you've seen two of the classic individuals. So
Absolutely. So in the so couple quick things on Achieve It. Is there anything you can share about what it's like to become the CEO of a startup from the VC side? Because I know a lot of people find that to be a difficult transition, a very challenging one. And I'm just wondering if there's any insights or a key lesson learned, something you carry with you now.
yeah, 1,000 of them. But I think the main overarching thing, first of all, was super humbling because I thought, oh, I'll get in there and we'll just execute our way out of it. And Achieve It had many, many challenges. And so, when your product has had, 10 different developers who, had different thoughts and different ideas, and no one's, using sort of the right documentation and nobody, there's been so many hands in it. You have all this technical debt. You don't even know where to start. So it was glitchy. We had 1,000 bugs. We had no systems. We didn't have, a good team around it. And that was not my strong suit.
Just full pause for CEOs. If this is you and you have a VC,
Well,
read the room.
we literally, I mean, and then this was not things that I knew how to go fix. And
Right.
so
They're not
it was,
easy to fix.
it was go to market. So that was actually the first time. And actually, Mark and I talk about it all the time, is that, that was one time that I got a good nudge, because you can be COO many, many, many times. It is not the same. There's nothing that prepares you for being CEO than being CEO.
That's right.
And for the first time, everything's on you. And so it doesn't matter if you have the context, it doesn't matter if you have the experience. It's your job to solve it. And so clearly some things are through yourself and some things are through other people, but that is your job, is to get everything solved. And so
And in a fast growing startup, or one that is supposed to grow fast,
or when you're burning money,
you're in an entirely, you are on the frontier of your industry, and there is no rest from that. You
Exactly.
cannot rest. You are on the front line of your industry and your company. That's where you sleep.
Yep. Well, and that is another thing, is that it's all encompassing. So there is no lines like you leave at 5 o'clock and, no, you're yes, you're 24/7. And so,
It really is.
but I remember like telling Mark, yeah, we have this latency problem, and man, I am stumped. And he's like, well, it's your job to solve it, so you better figure it out, So, and then serendipitously, I was like on a flight, and I was next to somebody who was the CTO, had just left Cabbage, and I'm like, what are you planning on doing next? And he was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to take some time to figure it out. And I said, well, while you're figuring it out, you want a little side gig, and we can like work together, and you can help me understand. And I mean, it was
Talk about this latency problem.
exactly. Well, I get it. You want to take a little rest, but how about this? So it actually ended up working out perfect, because I was like, the engagement looks like this. I need you to go in. I need you to assess all the normal things, people, process, and tools. And then I need you to keep me educated along the way. So I need you to teach me what I don't know, help me fill in the gaps. What are you thinking? The things that are concerns, why are they concerns? And then your thought process on how you would go about solving it. And then I need you to work yourself out of a job by helping me build a team and finding a leader that's the right for this organization, if the person that we have in place is not that person.
So I just want to say that's a snapshot of your recipe for scaling. And it's really interesting. And to give a leader, even a contract leader, the view not just current day, but where we're going with this, I think is a key skill a lot of leaders miss, is that the team, even contract team, they need to know the road we're on. They need to know where we're headed, because it's not even just about fixing this latency problem. It's this latency problem that has to also be visible to the next person in the seat, with the right documentation or the right infrastructure, that it never happens again, that with their KPI, and here's for this. And that context is so critical. And it's just so clear that you do a beautiful job setting the context.
Well, and I will say that just keeping the entire team like aligned was something, I think that innately you understand that, but when you're moving fast, you have to stop and make sure that everybody, they like not only where we're going, but the why around it and their role in making it happen. Because a lot of times, especially in early stage, because you're doing a lot of shifting, right? Like you learn new information and you're pivoting, and that can feel like whiplash.
What kind of cadences, or maybe there was no time for cadences? How did you get that done? The reason I'm asking is getting back to this idea of the AI accelerated startup, whether or not it's an AI startup, they're using AI in the kitchen.
Right.
So I feel that this acceleration is putting a level of stress on leaders today and the C-suite that has never been. And that's been said before, but now it's really multiplied. And so some of the cadences, weekly meetings, stand-ups, don't even work as well as they used to, because you can literally get 10 times the code out of your team of 10 Devons than you could in a week this time last year. So, how do you frame up as a performance engineer, reading the room and knowing the type of cadences your team needs as things grow and change?
So I think that, well, I'll answer like there was the cadences that I think that you can do when you're in office versus when you're remote. I
Yeah.
think that's the other dynamic, aside from the fact that AI is escalating the pace at which things are moving and changing. And so the need for the frequency is higher. When you are remote, that's completely changed too. And so with Achieve It, we were in office and there was like completely different behaviors. In terms of not only how often you're meeting, but just your ability to sense when things are going well and they're not with either the team or individuals. And so there's so much to be said for being able to walk around, read people's body language, overhear conversations, identify, like areas of frustration. And so, excuse me, I think that that is one of my good skills. And so I felt very much like, that I was on top of things when we were in the office. When that changed and you have no pulse on what is happening, even though you're doing like all the team stand-ups and you're attending all those things, and obviously you have, a stand-up with the entire team once a week or once a month, and you have all hands where you're giving, everybody and you're setting the vision, and you like have everybody's on board on what we're measuring and why we're measuring it, and you're giving the updates on those measurements. It like those things it's completely different, but you also lose the human element. And so in a startup, so much of like why people are there, it's not necessarily because of the money, because you're always like, I know that you're on the low side of the scale, but and of course it's the opportunity, but so much of it is like the bonding and the connective tissue between that team trying to
Work that
accomplish
has
something.
meaning. Yeah,
Yes,
playing
that
on a team is always fun.
and it is so much more difficult to get that
Team.
yes, the thread, not necessarily their own team. Because I think, if you work in sales, they're on the phone enough to like they have that camaraderie, but it's the like connective tissue between, especially if you think of go to market being, product first, then marketing, sales, and success. All of those people have to be on the same page. And so I know it's not exactly
No,
talking about the AI thing,
I'm
but
deriving from what you're saying, and I'm going to be curious about it, and I'm going to, have thoughts developing about it, that maybe in office is a competitive advantage more even than it used to be in this age of AI, because it allows the human team to use all of their human skills, EQ, however you want to say that, but there's a qualitative skill set, and every time we interact with AI, we see it's not there. And so great to have execution of certain things so simply done for us. Great to have good judgment. But then in addition to that, this EQ that allows you to qualitatively sense what only a human can sense about the team. That's an interesting thought. And
that's a
I,
super interesting observation. And as you were talking, I was thinking through it because, originally everyone was like, oh, it's such an advantage because now you're not constrained to the geography on the talent. And so if there's a super talented engineer that you want who lives in Washington State, great. They can be on the team and you can assimilate them and they can start contributing just as easily as someone who lives down the street. Now that that's changed and everybody can come back in office, I thought, yes, it's an advantage just because it keeps people aligned. But I think you're absolutely right that it keeps people, you can pivot and get everyone up to speed on what's changing like so much quicker because it's in real time. And so as you're learning things, like just imagine you can pull everybody into a huddle and all of those things just become part of that cadence of what you're doing is, that doing that on a frequent basis just becomes the norm. Whereas if you have everybody on Zoom, well, is everybody available? And, how hard is it going to be to communicate to get everybody together? So just because of the logistical challenge, you probably don't communicate or your reflexes are slower because it's more daunting to actually have the communication with the full team. Whereas if they were there, you could just huddle up and say, hey, just want to share with everybody, this is something that we learned. Should we do something different in response to it?
Yeah. Well, fascinating. One of the things I wanted to touch on before I have to let you go and get back to your busy day is current reality for you here at BIP. Um, what are you focusing on this year? What are some of the things that are top of mind for you? Because we're taking this interview is happening in February of 2025. And so there's a little bit of a new beginning energy to the year still. Also, we're in a new political process, lots going on.
For sure.
What's top of mind for you as you think about creating the highest possible trajectory for you and the team this year?
Great question. And like you said, very timely. So we've put a lot of effort into thinking through, and when I say put a lot of effort, 2024 was very much focused on what is the best structure, the best framework. How do we actually make an impact? Because one thing that was for sure when I came back to sort of create performance engineering, certainly because I had been on the other side, it was, we're not going to move around deck chairs. We're not going to, and although it's helpful to, like, if someone says, hey, can you know, help me build out a sales territory, or do you have a comp plan that, you know, is standard, or, you know, those types of things, yes, certainly helpful. But if we're going to make meaningful change, especially for early stage companies, there's some pretty obvious things that if we learned them because we're on the, like, they went badly, and we recognized what is the handicap, then we would not be very smart if we're not trying to instill those things early in the process. So 2025 is all about what I would say executing on the BIP way. And the BIP way is a set of ways not only do we engage with each other and our entrepreneurs and our investors and our, you know, overall ecosystem, and who are we as a firm, but also, you know, our approach to investing, and a big part of that is how we engage with portfolio companies with performance engineering.
So, what's more important from your experience in performance engineering? Preventing mistakes, like the top three reasons startups fail in our portfolio, preventing those or accelerating excellence?
So, and this is not a very good answer. It's both. So I think that if it's like the avoiding mistakes, there's some clear things on the foundation building that if you help them prioritize the right things, because again, as we were talking about, there's so many things that they're trying to solve for. So there is an order of operations
You
that
know,
makes
I
sense.
honestly find the skill of prioritization to be one that I speak with CEOs a lot. Now, you invest a little bit later than Ballard does, so we lead seed rounds. We're the first professional investor in. But one of the conversations I frequently have with my CEOs, who are all people I think can change the freaking world, is prioritize, prioritize your battle because you can't win
Right.
all of them. And really focusing on one at a time today will really, like, I think
That will serve you later.
CEOs get further in at my stage of engagement, killing it on one thing today and killing it on something else tomorrow, and then handling the rest as best their energy can.
Yep.
Rather than feeling like there's death by a thousand cuts, because there are definitely a thousand cuts in the air for them.
Yep, no doubt. And they're always coming at it, like, there's typically one of two strengths. So they're either coming at it because they're, like, from the engineering perspective, and they have this great vision around the product, and that's where their strengths lies, or they're coming at it from a sales perspective, and they, you know, are very charismatic, and they are, you know, very dedicated to the cause, and they want to solve something. But then the other side is almost always lacking, because they're going to, your natural inclination is to lean into the things that you feel most comfortable with. And so I think helping them see that, okay, there's an order across the organization, and putting in these foundational building blocks are super important. And I promise that if you slow down just a little bit and we get these things in place before you start spending in these certain areas, that, you know, you'll retain more of your company. And
Let's
you'll move faster.
ground that plane. Don't, obviously, I'm not asking for a startup's name, but if you could share a story of a real company where you put something like this in place so that the founders listening to us really understand what you mean. Because one of the things that's happening in the startup world is we're not trying to talk in any code, and we're not as bad as pure finance.
Right, for sure.
But we are. When we talk about a system, and they've never seen one.
Yeah, so I'll be happy to sort of expand. So, one of the things that I think is really important, and is certainly important to us, is that the entrepreneurs that we invest in, understand what partnership means on both sides. And so, part of that is sort of experiencing that partnership earlier before they actually take the funding, and that we are very clear about what an onboarding plan involves, the why behind why these things are being prioritized. And so we get involved, we, the performance engineering team, in the diligence phase. And so it's not, again, if something's totally nascent, that doesn't mean we're not going to invest. It's just trying to understand where they're at, so that we mostly inform. Yes, we're informing the risk decision on the investment, but we're also informing the onboarding plan. And the other is that clearly, um, the infrastructure and the development that you'd expect at a $500,000 company is very different than a 5 million. So building out an assessment that's on a curve. And so and we call them the 4 pillars of growth, but so there's visibility, getting that visibility, the foundation building, then you can be targeted and have the greatest value prop. But if you don't execute, you can't really do that. And then sort of there's all sort of how do we make sure that entire revenue model comes together?
It sounds like a lot is on sales funnel analytics.
There's definitely there's in talent and finance. So we don't spend a lot on looking at the technology and trying to understand if like all those lines of code are great.
Because they'll be rewritten.
Exactly. Well, and the other thing is, if you can prove out that, customers like what they're using and that you're solving a unique and very acute problem,
Yeah.
then probably something's working enough. But where we see them bogged down, especially in the beginning, prioritizing a talent plan and making sure you have the right people around the table and helping them think through, not like, oh, we're going to do this massive org design, but let's talk through it. Like, what if you had a blank sheet of paper and you were starting, and you could sketch out the perfect organization and you had everything you needed to get to the moon and back? What does that look like? Okay, now let's reverse engineer. What's the most critical component? And where are you spending your time today? And if you could repurpose that, and doing the exercise where you sit
Where
down,
should you spend your time?
exactly,
What are you best at?
what are the things that you can do that nobody else can do? What are the things that you do now, but other people could probably do as good, but maybe not better? And what are the things that you're doing that someone else could clearly do better? Helping them prioritize their own time and thinking through what talent do we need around the table, making sure that they have financial acumen. And, a lot of times, I'm sure you see it all the time, that, they've used maybe the person that was submitting their tax return, and now all of a sudden they have a revenue model that's SaaS.
And often a family member.
Often, I was actually gonna say, like, Uncle Bob down the street.
Mothers, fathers, yes, like there's a lot of family member engagement because they can access that resource.
Right. And they're trying to save money, and they don't see the long-term
I was
consequence.
literally reviewing the sales contracts in the diligence room of a startup that, so we meet 20 to 30 every week. So this is pretty frequent, but this one really got to me because it was very, very cool technology. And I really loved what they were doing. And I loved the acceleration of the sales. And so I dug into the few contracts that they had, and they were all services contracts because a family member was a certain type of attorney and had written
And that's
them
all
a
they do.
sales
Yep.
contract and did the best they knew. But I was like, this is not SaaS.
Yep.
And you are trying to, and you're presenting your pitch decks, like you think
This is
you
recurring
are, you
revenue,
think
but
you're
yes.
recurring revenue, but you're actually not. And there's a pull line there that you have to have proven successful experience in the things that you're not expert in yourself.
Exactly. Well, and I find also it is, at least as as it relates to recognizing revenue and other things, it's always innocent. Like it's not
Oh, absolutely.
irrational.
And
to
it's
think
not
that
irresponsible. It's the
it's
best they know at the time.
Well, and you would think, like, off that example I was using earlier, that, oh, we got it renewed, so that's more revenue. Like, this is the revenue that we have this month. That's not irrational way of viewing the world. It's just
No.
just not the way that is recognized. And so, I think that to me, those 3 pillars, if you can get the talent And again, I'm not talking all the way down to SDRs. If you get the right leadership in, all the rest.
They'll handle the
Yeah, they
SDRs.
cascade. Yeah,
They'll
exactly.
fire the right SDRs.
Which is likely often, oftentimes the case, because you are asking people that probably have to do a job with limited resources,
Very limited
limited
resources.
infrastructure, and
A lot of
they're
pressure.
doing a ton of experimentation, and there's nothing that's repeatable, and so that's takes a special person, especially in the SDR role. But anyway, those three things, that looking at making sure that they have financial integrity, and helping them get that so that they have real visibility to what's happening there. Certainly the talent and helping them think through as an organization, what do we want to be when we grow up? And then certainly the go-to-market fundamental pieces so that they're best set up for success before we start investing in sales and marketing dollars. Like, to me, those are the essential things to help them get right. And so we talk through the assessment, like where they are, because oftentimes they actually may be above where I would expect for where they're at
On
in certain
points.
things.
And
Exactly.
that's always so good to see.
Exactly. Well, and they almost always are, and they, but help them understand the rationale and why we're doing these things and how that's going to help them. And then get on that same, get alignment on that, the milestones, the timing. And sometimes it's asking them to spend some of the new money that they're getting because, but prioritizing those things, but not telling them that after they accept the funding, but getting on the same page about what collaboration looks like and what a partnership with us looks like on the front end, so there's no surprises, ensuring that we're in alignment about what we're going to do, and then just executing to make sure that they have
The
the
plan you
best
created
case.
really co-created with their input and their feedback to what you had to say.
And their
It's a-
priorities too, because there's obviously things that are, as a CEO, that are bothering them that they want to make sure that they get solved. And so oftentimes, you're always asking them, what's keeping you up at night and what are priorities for you? Oftentimes they're not going to prioritize the same things because they don't see them as important, but
They
they're,
don't see the same picture the investor does, which is part of the strength of the investor founder partnership. But I love that collaboration when it comes on both sides.
well, otherwise, they're going through the motions, and it's not going to really, they're not going to earnestly try to get the most that they can out of the process. And so that doesn't help anyone.
I'm gonna paint a picture and I'm gonna ask you your opinion. And I'll certainly share mine, but I don't want to condition your answer either way. So I've had the honor of working with well over 100 CEOs, helping them scale and grow. And I would say broadly, you can put them in two buckets. One bucket is I am curious about myself as a person. I want to uncover my strengths and my weaknesses, and I will work on those weaknesses until I am a polished being. And then the other perspective would be I'm a curious person. I want to work on myself as a human being. I'm going to really understand my strengths so that I can optimize them. And I'm going to get inside into my weaknesses so that I can shore them up in some way with a system, a person, process. So, in those two camps, which one do you think is the most successful in IT?
I personally think it's the second because of the fact that,
Me too.
okay,
100%. I admire them both. I admire them both.
this is really hard to get
This is
to. And those individuals don't
They-
end up utilizing their team and the strengths of others to get to where they need to be.
Exactly. So well said. I think the fact that one is incentivized to build trusted relationships creates the team.
And sees them as valuable.
Right. And teamwork does make the dream work. No matter how much AI you put on it, if the team is smaller, that's wonderful, very optimized, but you still need that team. No, I really agree. And it's it's an interesting thing because, of course, they're both very admirable human beings, but I think only one has the genes to scale.
Well, I certainly think that in times of when things aren't going well, that person is a lot better informed and can pivot a lot quicker than the person who's relying exclusively on their ability to fine tune their own personal skills. That's a journey of a lifetime. We all are
Sure.
constantly working, and but
I've abandoned my weaknesses. I have other people for that.
I'm too shy. Like, that is actually what we're talking about. Like,
Yeah.
and the fact of the matter is that, you can't be great at everything. I mean, you might be, there's lots of people who are both right and left minded, but
For sure.
eventually you're just not going to have, your strengths are not going to be holistically across the board. And you have to, and there's just something very like freeing about having, there's nothing better than to like go into a room and, have a session where you're trying to problem solve and like people come up with solutions that you never would have even thought of. And then you're like, I have arrived, like this is what my job is. So like, my job is simply to help orchestrate these super talented people and give them everything that they need to be successful. And like, if that's all you have to do, what a wonderful job, right? So that is kind of the promised land. So
It's clear you're a master teaching other masters in this area. Before I let you go, is there something in any, doesn't have to be about building companies, that you'd like to share with our audience? And I'll let you know that our audience, I mean, there will be hundreds of founders listening to you the week we put this out. And over the long term of the first year, thousands of founders will hear your voice. And some VCs, we love y'all, but you know how to get to us. Okay, so for the founders, is there anything you'd like to share with them about what you've learned?
yeah, I think that first of all, you often get in your own head that everybody else is getting massive success and that you're the only one that's struggling, or that everybody's up and to the right, and why is it so hard for you? You're in a difficult situation because it is very lonely. And Mark always says it's the loneliest job, and it's true because you can't. I mean, you probably leverage pretty much all your savings in your family. You've asked people for their
More than
investment,
they could give.
more than they could give.
Right.
And you feel a tremendous amount of pressure. So obviously you can't complain to your family. That would spook them. You're in the same situation with your team. It's, probably 99% of them are there because you have the vision and you are confident, and they're teeing off your confidence to gain their own. And so the last thing that you can do is like show any weakness and get scared and show. But everybody that is in your shoes is feeling that same way. It's totally expected. It's totally normal. And I often say people are often hesitant to like spend money on like having a coach or having put in an infrastructure that is trusted advisors outside of, even if that's somebody that you have to pay, so that you can like bounce things off and be okay mentally yourself and get some reassurance that what you're experiencing is normal, because you're going to have many sleepless nights. You're going to have many self-doubt, like, am I the right person for this job? And could somebody else do this better? Get that out of your head, and if whatever that takes to get there and whatever support system you need to build, it's going to be critical, because not every day is going to be good. And recognize that, but also figure out ways to protect your own mental health around that, because it's real.
That is such incredible advice and perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And I just have to respond back to you and say, we see so much the same thing, that in building valor, we do three things to try to help with that very specific piece. When we lead a seed round, we introduce our founders to masterclass peer sessions with other CEOs. They're led by a founder that has expertise in the thing they're really great at. Like Sean Cook just did one on the partnerships playbook that he used at MailChimp building out their partnerships, and that he used at Shop Visible selling to Epicor. But the leadership's great, but the peers in the room are other founders. And so we try to really help our founders bond to each other.
So they have an ecosystem to
So they have an ecosystem, and it's not just about asking about what's your marketing stack. It's like, how are you sleeping?
Right.
Or who's your coach? And then we also, in the first year for sure, and longer if that's desired and helpful, our board member does weekly, really emotional check-in calls. That's not a board meeting with our founder. And so
love
I have a few of those. Everyone who's a board leader with us has a few of those. And they're specifically not asking about KPIs, but how are you doing? So VCs, we have failed companies, mediocre companies, and successful companies. So we can be, if we choose to be, a safe space to talk about that. And
Love that.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's hard. And so now I've also learned I need to coach the coaches. But it's a developing
That's
process.
right.
And then the third thing is we always recommend that they join a group like EO, YPO, whatever it is for Vistage. It's not about we have a favorite group. but the value of having,
You just want them to have community.
like what you said, I mean, they need their own team where they can safely express all the things they can express in their zone of genius. This was such a great conversation.
Yeah, it's super enjoyable. And as always, Lisa, thank you.
Thank you.